there, my name is Irene, and in this video, we'll do an introduction to SketchUp materials, one of the most important properties that you need to understand as an interior designer when 3D modeling. Now, in this video, we will cover the user interface of materials in SketchUp, as well as what are the system rules that drive how materials operate within SketchUp, and we will finish out by discussing what are the different editing properties that materials have. So let's get to it. All right, so when we start with our SketchUp template, the first thing that we're going to cover is where are our materials, how do we access them, how do we use them. And materials, interestingly enough, can be found both as a toolbar, basically a button, but also as a window in the default tray. So in terms of buttons or commands, the material command can be found on your large tool set over here on the top left. It's called Paint Bucket. Now the quick key is B for bucket, and if not, you can also find it in your tools menu in the first section. But when it comes to working with materials, the bucket command only really activates your ability to apply a material, but then the question becomes, what material are you applying? Is that actually the material that you would like to have? Or would you like to have a different material? Maybe you want to change the properties of the current material, which is why most of the properties that you're going to work with when you're working with materials in SketchUp will be found in the material window in your default tray. Now, the material window in my case is the second from the top, and if I click on this tab, it's going to expand. If you do not see the material window on your default tray, no worries. All you have to do is go to Window, Default Tray, and Materials. There they are. Now, I will point out the fact that Materials is one of the few places where SketchUp for Windows versus SketchUp for Mac differ quite a lot. The user face is completely different, so I'm not going to be able to give a one-to-one if you're a Mac user. Now, the commands are really the same, and the behaviors and the options is just that the presentation is slightly different. You will find all of these features, it's just that they're not going to be presented in the same way. So when you expand your material window, this is what you should be met with. It might be slightly different depending on whether you have been working with materials before or not, but to do a quick run of what are the options that we see here, we have on the top left corner our current material. So this is the equivalent of untag or layer 0. Basically, whenever you create new geometry, that geometry comes with this default material, and in fact the name of the material is default. Now I want to point out the fact that this material seems to be kind of like two triangles, a white one and a blue grayish one. Hold that thought in your mind. We're going to address why in a minute. So next to the preview of the material, you have the name of the current material, and then on the right side you're going to have these three buttons. So the first one allows you to get a double material display, so to speak. So basically I can access and at the same time edit. I'm going to be honest with you, I very rarely will have these double display active, but you know what? Depending on how you work with SketchUp, you may want to do that. I'm going to collapse mine. More importantly, underneath that, you have the Create Material button, which when you click on it is going to prop up this window, which is going to allow you to create new materials. We're going to discuss the details of creating new materials a little bit later. Underneath that, we have the default material. So basically, this is one thing that, if I remember correctly, is different between Mac and Windows users. Basically, in the context of SketchUp for Windows, the default material is not really a material that falls within any of these categories. So SketchUp basically makes it its own separate material that you can access at any time. There are also some instances in which you want to apply this material in a kind of way to reset the appearance of geometry. Now, moving forward, underneath the current material and these buttons, we have these two tabs. This is where we're going to spend most of our time when we're working with SketchUp materials, between selecting and editing. So one of the nice things about SketchUp is that it comes with its own library of materials that are readily available for you to use. So for example, I can go to the asphalt folder, and here I'm going to find several asphalt and concrete materials. I can use this little arrow key to go back. For example, we have several brick and cladding. Now these are a little bit more exterior materials, so to speak, but don't worry, they have a selection of interior materials. So for example, wood, you have floors, you have veneers, they also have tiles, a pretty expensive selection of tiles, if I may say so. Let's expand it here a little bit more. There you go. And if I come back here, you also have some stones. So that would be marbles, granites, fabrics, carpet and fabrics, and whatnot. So we're going to talk about these materials a little bit later. To be entirely honest with you, from all of the material folders that SketchUp makes available for you, the only one that I really work, or the one that I work the most with, is going to be colors. So this one basically has a pretty extensive range of colors that you can select from, and you're going to see why I say this a little bit later. Now, within these options here, you also have edit, and it is right now grayed out. We're going to learn why a little bit later, but keep in mind that the same way that you can select materials, you can edit them. Coming back to my select tab, you can switch the folder that you are checking either by going back with the arrow key or by expanding this drop menu. And here you can see all of the options of material folders, or you can go to in model. You can also go to in model by clicking on this little house. So this little house here keeps track of what materials are currently in your model. And I want to be very, very clear, because there's are two same but different concepts. One is materials that exist in this project, and another very different thing are materials that are currently applied in your 3D model. We're going to see how we can differentiate them, and we're going to see what we can do to get rid of those excess materials that we may have created or brought in, but we no longer need. Next to the drop menu, you have these two other buttons, and the most important one here is going to be the sample paint. We're going to see a little bit later when we start applying and changing materials the best way to use this guy, but basically what the sample paint option is going to allow you to do is pick materials that are already in your model. And finally, this button here is just for material management in general. So you're going to see things such as the fact that you can save materials, you can load materials from other collections, you can change the way that you preview your materials, and more importantly, you can purge. Remember that word. So first thing first, okay, I understand my user interface, but how are we going to use our materials? Well, in order to use your materials, you first have to apply them on a surface. So I'm going to draw myself a rectangle. Doesn't really matter the size for now. Let's make it that big. And now if you want to apply a material to a face in SketchUp, all you have to do is click on the little square of the material. Now you will see that the bucket for the bucket command is the cursor shape, and all I need to do is click on the face. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. If I end my command by pressing spacebar and I bring back my bucket command by pressing B, you will see that it's still going to have my last material. So whatever was the last material that I selected, that will be your current material. If you want to, let's say, remove this pink, what you would have to do is come back to the default material, click on it. So that's going to set the default material as your current material. And then when I click, you can see that it goes back to being white. So this is a good point to introduce a very important concept when it comes to materials in the realm of SketchUp. And that is that materials, when it comes to raw geometry, can only be applied to faces. You cannot change the color of a line using materials. But these faces are complex because basically when you're thinking about a SketchUp face, again, I keep on in other videos referring to the fact that when I think about SketchUp, I think about it as paper. And this is another scenario where that is the case, because although I have a single face, this face has two sides. So every raw face in SketchUp has the potential to have two different materials applied to it. And this is why your default material in SketchUp has that white and bluish gray duality of tones. It's a subconscious way of SketchUp to tell you, hey, every face has two sides, and each of those sides can have a different material. Now we're going to explore in what kind of scenarios would you want to have a face that has two different materials in each side. But for the time being, keep in mind that when you apply a material to a face, that is one side of the face. You may want or you may not want to have a different material on the other side of that face. Now, following on applying materials, whenever it comes to applying materials, there are some best practices, because the truth is that selecting a material and then clicking on each and every face can be very annoying. You don't really want to do that, which is why we're going to see what are some of the more optimal ways of applying materials. So let's say that I'm going to draw myself not just a rectangle, but I'm going to make it into a box. So by default, I would have to apply this material in all 6 faces of my box, which is very, very annoying. Or what I could do instead is select all of the faces that I want to apply the material to, select my material, let's go this time with this like nice peachy color, and click. And what you can see is that same as with my other modification commands, selecting the geometry first and then applying the modification is the way to go. This way I can select all of the faces that I want to have that new material and just apply the material with a single click. But you have to be careful because SketchUp is hiding something from you. And in order to understand what it is, I need to take one of these faces and delete it. The inside of the box has not been painted. So why is that? Well, this is where I'm going to explain what is the difference between the white side and the blue-gray side of the default material. Because SketchUp didn't create those two colors just to help you understand that every face has two sides. The color also indicates the inside versus the outside side of a face. So this goes back to working with solid geometries. Remember that video? So remember, in an ideal world, all of the geometry that you create in SketchUp is solid geometry. And if a geometry is a solid form, basically it's a closed boundary of faces, those faces are going to have an exterior side and an interior side. So in SketchUp, whenever you're creating geometry, the white side is going to be the outer side, and that is the side that you are supposed to see. So if when you're modeling, you see a blue-gray face pop, it's not necessarily bad. It doesn't necessarily mean that you did anything wrong, but it just means that something that should be on the inside is now showing on the outside. So you may want to revise like how that geometry was created, because again, it might mean that what you're getting is not a solid geometry. Now, that being said, it's not that big of a deal. But this leads me to the question of when I painted this geometry, why did it only paint the outside faces? And this has to do with managing the size of your file. So think about it this way. Right now, the materials that we're doing are solid colors, which means that in terms of memory or size or data, these materials are very simple and they are very light. But eventually, we're going to start working with complex materials that are based on textures. Don't worry if you don't know what I'm talking about. But basically, these materials tend to be heavier because they carry more information than a simple solid color. Now, imagine that your model has been properly made and all of your geometry is solid geometry, which means that you're only seeing the outside faces, the white faces of your geometry. But when it comes to painting, you're painting the outside and you're painting the inside. That is very bad because then it basically means that all of your geometry is going to be twice as heavy as it should be. And that is not a good practice in general. So what SketchUp is doing is that in order to keep your model light and efficient, what it does is that when you select raw geometry and you choose to paint it with a material, SketchUp by default will only paint the white faces, the outside faces. But that does not mean that there's nothing you can do about it. There will be cases in which you want both the outside and the inside faces of a material to show, especially if you single face geometry that has no thickness. So in those cases, if you want to have a geometry where both faces are painted, all you have to do is once you've done your selection, you're just going to click in any of the gray, bluish gray faces, and that will basically override that and will tell SketchUp that you actually do want to paint all of the interior faces, okay? But this method, as you can see, is still a little bit annoying because you have to select all the faces, you have to click on the white faces, then you have to click on the bluish gray faces, which is why the best way to apply materials in SketchUp is to apply them to groups or components. So I'm gonna make this box here, and then I'm gonna make this box into either group or component. It does not matter. I'm gonna make it into a group this time. And let's say that this time I'm gonna go with this like nice little yellow. And look at this. All I have to do is select my box. It's a single click because it is a group or component. Then select my material, click once. And now you can see that the material has been applied to all of the faces, both outside and in. So this is one of the reasons why, all the way going back to my video of modeling complex geometry using groups and components, one of the breakdowns for geometry that I recommend is based on materials. Because if you have broken down your geometry based on, let's say, oh, this is going to be stone, this is going to be glass, this is going to be wood, this is going to be tile, then what's going to happen is that when it comes to applying the materials, you can just apply the materials to the group or component, and all of the faces within it will get the same material at the same time. So it is just much more efficient. Now you may be asking yourself, okay, so if I am applying my materials to a group and component, what happens if I want to have an exception? Let's say, for example, that this box here is a room. And yes, I want the entire room to be this like desaturated yellow, but then I want one single wall to be a different color. I want this guy to be an accent color. What do we do in those cases? Do I need to explode the group or component? Do I need to take this face and move it outside of the group or component? Well, the answer is none of that. SketchUp is considering that possibility, and basically what's going to happen is that when it comes to applying materials, there is a hierarchy between applying materials to raw geometry and applying materials to groups and components. And basically the way that it works is that any material applied to a raw face will supersede any material applied to a group or component. You can basically think about it as if, let's say that the block is originally whatever color this is, and then you're taking a paintbrush and you're just painting that additional face a different color. So I'm going to go inside my group or component. I'm going to select my new material. Let's say that in this case, I want it to be like this yellow here, this ochre color, and then I'm going to click on the face that I want to overwrite. Click, and that's it. Click, and that's it. See? So basically what is happening here, it's a little bit hard to understand, but basically the cube, the box, the component is still all of it, this like baby yellow. But then what's happening is that these two individual faces have received an additional instruction that, hey, you are going to have this material on top. And the reason that I'm explaining it this way is because if I want to change the material of my box, I can do that. I can, for example, select this mint green and click, and it's going to overwrite all of the faces of the box except the two that I decided that I wanted them to be a different material. But if I change my mind and I'm like, you know what? I want these guys to go back to being the original green. I don't need to paint them green. Like, I don't need to go in here and paint them green because that would still be an override. Instead, what you want to do is remove the material. And the way that we remove materials in SketchUp is with the default material. So this is why it gets its own dedicated button, because what I can do is select my default material and say both of you, click, are going to go back to being the original material of the group or component. Okay, so think about it that way. When you apply a material to a component, that is the property of the group or component. When you apply a material to an individual face within a group or component, that is an override that is sitting on top of that original color. So if you remove that original color, the face will go back to being whatever the group and component is as a whole. Okay, same way, if I, for example, let's say I'm going to paint these guys in green and I decide that I no longer want my box to have any color, I can use my default material to basically strip all of the materials in my group or component, but the ones that I overrode will remain overridden. Okay, now that we have gathered a pretty decent collection of materials, I think it is time for me to go to my model in place materials. So if I click on the little house here, you will see that my list of materials has increased. Let me delete this lady. I don't think we're going to need her anymore. And what I want you to pay attention to is the following. Out of all of my materials in model, not all of them have this little triangle on the bottom right corner. So materials that have these little bottom right corner are going to be materials that are currently in use. So these currently in use can translate into two different ways. One is that the material is currently applied to a geometry that is in your model, but option two is that the material is applied to a group or component that is in your model. And that doesn't necessarily mean in the model space. So this is why I deleted this lady, because I want to show you that despite the fact that I deleted her, the materials that were part of that component are still on my library. And that is because even if you delete a group or component from your model, SketchUp will keep track of it. In fact, one way that you can check what components you currently have in your model is on your default tray, the Components tab. So if I expand this guy here, it operates a little bit similarly to the materials. I don't necessarily love this menu, but the one thing that I really like about it is that if I click on the model components, you will see a list of all the components that currently exist in your model. So this is very important to understand because a very common issue that people have when they work with SketchUp, especially in interior design, is the fact that you're trying out different things all the time, right? Like, let's say that you're putting together a living room and you bring this sofa and you're like, no, I don't like it, and you get it out. And you're like, you bring this rug and you're like, no, I don't like it, and you delete it. And you bring things and you remove them. And you will create materials and you remove them. And you think that just because the material is not in the model, or just because the component is not in the model, that it has completely vanished, but that isn't the case. SketchUp keeps track. And that is a problem because then models can get very big, very heavy for no reason whatsoever. So how can we fix this? How can we make sure that our models don't get out of hand? Well, that is where that purge word that I mentioned is going to come in handy. All of these different elements have their own individual purges. So for example, I can come here to my material properties and I can purge unused materials. Or I can come here to my component properties and I can purge unused components. But this is a little bit annoying because you have to go one by one by one. So my recommendation is that you go to your window and then model info, and within model info under statistics, you're going to find all of the things that make your model. So you can see that my model currently has 16 edges, 6 faces, 1 group, 1 component, 1 tag, 24 materials, and 1 style. So basically, this is just keeping track of all the things that exist in your model. What you can do is you can purge unused. So what this is going to do is basically read all of these different assets that Sketchup is keeping track, and it's going to delete anything that is currently not in use. So for example, my lady is not currently being used in my model. These materials here, especially the ones that are assigned to the lady or the ones that don't have a little triangle, those materials are not currently in use. So I want you to pay attention to what happens to my component definitions and my materials when I purge. Bam! We went from 24 materials to 4 materials and 0 component definitions. So this is something that you should get used to doing regularly. Because again, the problem is that if you wait to do this until your model is like struggling, it's not going to be a good time. I remember once I was working with a colleague and she came to me because basically her model was like super slow and she wanted to see if there was anything that she could do to make it move faster. So basically when I checked the size of her file, it was something like 300,000 kilobytes. And I don't know how much you know about data units, but that's huge. That's gigantic. That's a stupid number. A really big, detailed, complex SketchUp model should have around 100,000 KB. So basically she had a very heavy file, but when I would look at the model didn't actually have that much stuff. So we put 2 and 2 together and we figure out she probably has a lot of stuff in the model that is not currently in use. So I told her, well, just purge the model. So she hit that purge button and then her computer was frozen for like 2 hours. It was terrifying. The whole time we thought that it was gonna crash. And then what do you do, right? So very, very important. You don't want to wait until your model is dying to purge. In fact, the recommendation that I give to most people is that you want to get into the workflow that at the end of the day, before you save and close your file, you purge. That way you clean, and the next day you're starting with a fresh, freshly cleaned model. Okay? So as you can see, my materials have definitely gone down, and I want to show you some of the other tools and options that we have in SketchUp. So the first one is going to be this guy over here, the material sampler. This is one of my favorite guys because the thing is that, especially when you work in interior design, you have a lot of repeating materials. Like you may have the same wood veneer in multiple pieces of built-in, or you may have the same tile in the floor and several of the walls. So a lot of the times when you want to apply a material, you don't want to have to go to your in model and then go through that list. Just to give you an idea, a good SketchUp model should have something like 100 materials. So when you have 100 materials, you don't want to have to scroll through them to find them. So the easiest, better way of finding materials is finding them in your model and picking them up. So that is what the material sampler is going to do. Now, instead of clicking here, because again, I hate having to click buttons on the screen, the quicker way to access the material sampler is going to be B for bucket and then Alt. You don't need to hold it. You just have to press it once and then click on a surface that has the material that you desire. Click and see, that's going to identify what material this guy is, and it's going to immediately make it my current material, so I can go here and apply it. Once again, Alt to pick, click on the material, click on the geometry that you want to overwrite. So as you can see, this is a much faster way to move through materials because again, most of the times you're just going to see something in the model and you're going to be, I want both of you to be the same. Now, keep in mind for my Mac users, it's a little bit different. First of all, you have weird buttons. You have that weird thingy button and then you have the option button, or maybe it's the same. Again, I'm not a Mac user, but from what I've seen, the sampler here doesn't actually sample the material itself. It samples the color. So I think in your case, it's either the control key or the shift key to select the material itself. Okay. If I'm wrong, let me know in the comments. I am not a Mac user. Okay, so we now know how to pick materials from our model, we know how to select materials from a library, and we know how to apply those materials to our model. But now let's talk about edit. So I'm going to go back to my colors, again, my favorite library, and let's pick a pretty color. I'm going to go down here. Ooh, I like this lavender, very pretty. But let's say that I want it to be prettier. Like I want to play a little bit with the saturation and like the hue. But if I go here to edit, you're going to see that it is grayed out. So why is that? Well, this is something very important to understand. This SketchUp material library that you see is looky, no touchy, touchy. Basically, the creators of SketchUp want you to have access to this library, but they don't want you accidentally messing up with the originals. So because of that, when you want to work with a material from the SketchUp library, if you want to edit it, you basically first have to apply it somewhere in your model. So for example, if I select my lilac here and I apply it to the model, basically what that is doing is creating a copy of the material that now exists in my model, and that copy you can edit. The original, not so much, but the copy you can edit, okay? So if you want to be able to edit a material from the SketchUp library, you have to first apply it. So that my editing options are available, let's take a quick look at what they are. So first of all, your screen may not look like mine. I think the default when you first install SketchUp is this guy. So this is the color wheel where basically you can move through hue, and then this is like brightness. I hate this. Like my brain does not understand this. Maybe it's the Photoshop years, but like I understand HLS or HSB. That's the language that I speak. So HLS and HSB are kind of same but different. It basically splits hue, saturation, and light, or hue, saturation, and brightness. Same. The other option is RGB, which is red, green, blue. Now, again, my favorite is HLS, HSL, sorry. And it's the one that I'm more comfortable with. So basically with this color, I could change the hue. So let's say that I want it to be a little bit more bluish. Well, I can just move on the hue axis. If I want it to be more desaturated, I can move on the saturation axis. And then if I want it to be lighter or darker, I can work with the lightness. And what I really like about this is that it allows me to create a very custom color. And I'm going to show you a trick a little bit later that will let you get exactly the color that you're looking for, even if you're working with specific paint samples. Like let's say you're working with Benjamin Moore, or you're working with Sherwin-Williams, or you're working with Behr paint, you can match colors to samples, okay? But that is basically for the colors. Now I'm gonna skip this guy for a minute and I'm gonna go to opacity. So one of the limitations of SketchUp materials is that they're very simple. Unfortunately, because SketchUp is not a photorealistic rendering software, your materials are going to be kind of cartoonish. They only have two properties. They have their general appearance, which is going to be color and texture, and then opacity, and that's it. You're not going to have things such as reflectivity or glossiness. You cannot have materials that glow. You cannot have materials that have like a texture pattern on them. Materials in SketchUp are really, really simple, which is why it becomes so important that we represent them with as much detail as these limitations will allow us. So opacity is just going to allow me to determine how see-through my material is. By default, it is 100%, and then as I move my slider down, you can see that my material becomes more and more see-through. My recommendation is that you never bring it all the way down. Like, I understand that glass is transparent, but the thing is that when you see this, it is hard for the viewer to understand where the actual material is, because the way that we humans detect glass is by its glossiness, and there's no glossiness, no reflectivity here, so you cannot just see a transparent material. So option one, you always give it a little bit of a tint, like I would say something like that. Or option two, I'm going to show you a little bit later, I think in another video, a cool trick to make cool glass in SketchUp. But for the time being, it's just a slider. One very important thing to know, and this is kind of cool about SketchUp materials, is that remember how I said that you have every face has two sides and each side can have a different material? Well, that applies for materials with opacity, but this is where things get weird. So I'm going to take all of this geometry and I'm going to make a copy of it that is a little bit further down so you can see how my material is see-through. Well, material is completely see-through, but if I go down, material is opaque. So what the hell is going on? Well, this is one of those weird idiosyncrasies from the fact that when you're working with SketchUp materials, they're not really realistic. Like, this is not necessarily how we work in real life with materials. Materials have properties and permanence and whatnot. Here, you're just kind of like make believe. You want things to look a certain way. So a weird behavior of SketchUp is that you can have a face that has a see-through material on one side and an opaque material on the other side. So what kind of scenarios would this be helpful? Well, in the context of interior design and architecture, you can use these kind of double-sided materials for something like glass, depending on what kind of renderings you're doing. So usually for me in industry, whenever I'm making architectural or interior design visualizations, there's going to be two types that I do: outside in, inside out. So what does that mean? Well, for example, let's say that I am doing a living room, but that living room leads to a backyard, and that backyard has floor to ceiling windows. So that way you can see that beautiful backyard. So in that case, I would want to have a see-through glass material so I can see that outside. But what's going to happen is that a lot of times within that same project, if I am doing what we call a bird eye view or an outside in view, that is when you're standing outside of the house and you're just kind of like looking into the building as a whole, you don't necessarily want the glass to be see-through, because if all of your glass is see-through, then it basically means that you're going to have to model, you're going to have to furnish, you're going to have to decorate every single room in the house that has access to a window. And that can be very time consuming and make your model heavy, and it's just not worth it. So in those cases, what we can do is we can make a glass material that is see-through on the inside, but opaque on the outside. So when you do the renderings of the house from the outside, you will know that it's windows because it's like a light blue. But then when you are inside looking at that backyard, you can actually see it because it's see-through. Now, this is the most common scenario, but you can also do this the opposite way. So sometimes I will be working in a project where I am doing the interior and I'm doing interior renderings and there are windows, but I don't necessarily know what is outside, or maybe what is outside is ugly. So in those cases, I will make my glass just a solid light blue, so the viewer understands that it's glass, but I don't have to actually model the stuff that is outside my window. And then the same way around, sometimes when we do bird eye views or outside renderings of a building, maybe the building is a glass box. Think of Miss Van der Rohe's Farnsworth house. It's just a fishbowl. You can see right through. So in that case, you want the outside side of the glass to be see-through, so you can actually see that transparency and that openness of the space. Now, these are very specific scenarios. The reason that I am spending so much time talking about this is because what is more likely to happen is that this is not a feature, but a problem. And this is going to be especially important when eventually we get to photorealistic rendering, because I'm going to be doing videos about working with V-Ray in SketchUp. And these double-sidedness of your material being see-through or not can cause a ton of issues with V-Ray materials. So when those issues start occurring, you will remember this video and be like, yes, I have an opaque material on the other side. Okay, so let's get rid of this and go back to our regular camera. Now, to finish up, I want to go back to my colors. I want to make this guy fully opaque because I want to talk about these two other buttons because they're kind of interesting. So basically what they allow us to do is change materials by picking a reference in model, but you're basically going to have two options. You have match color to the object or match color to the screen, and they are not the same. So for the first one, basically what you can do is say, hey, see this blue that I have here? Well, I don't want it to be blue anymore. I want it to be exactly like the color of this box here. So I can come here and say, hey, I'm going to sample this material and say it basically matches the material. If you regret it and you're like, oh Christ, that's too much beige, I want to go back, all you have to do is click on this button and this is basically going to undo whatever changes you did. Now, a more interesting option is this guy here, matching the screen. Because I don't know if you've noticed, but your colors actually have variations. Every material in SketchUp has three variations: a light tone, a mid-tone, and a dark tone. So basically what this tool allows you to do, let me see if I can get them pretty dramatic, there you go, is instead of matching the color overall, you can actually match the pixels on the screen. So if I come here and I say, okay, we're going to screen match, if I click on this guy, I'm going to get a light beige. If I click on this mid guy, it's going to be a little bit darker. And if I click on this guy, it's going to be pretty dark. So I find this guy a little bit touch and go because as you can see, the colors don't really feel like they match. So I don't use this guy super often, but there's a few scenarios where this guy's like really cool. Okay, So let's reset my material. And now, finally, we're gonna talk about textures. Now for textures, I need to have a material that has a texture. So I'm gonna draw myself another rectangle and I'm going to come here and I'm going to select from my library, let's say wood, let's go with a wooden floor, and I'm gonna select this one here and I'm going to apply it. So there is my material with a texture. So first of all, what is a texture? Well, the funny thing about when you start working with 3D modeling is that you're going to see that like it's a shared universe. Basically, there are certain concepts that are universal in the realm of 3D modeling. So that means that when you understand the concept in SketchUp, it will translate to 3ds Max, to Blender, to Revit, to Enscape, to basically any other tool that allows you to work with materials in 3D modeling. So one of those concepts is texture. And this can be a little bit confusing because when we think about texture, we think about the feel of something, we think about the variations of that surface, but in the context of 3D modeling, texture is basically going to be any image that is used as a pattern that repeats across a surface. You're also going to find the same concept with other names. So in other places, you're going to see it referred as maps or bitmap or also albedo, I've seen in some cases. There's a little bit of variation, but you can think about all of them as the same thing, which is basically the image that is a repeating pattern that drives the appearance of that surface. And the way that I like to explain texture versus material to people is the following. Whenever you're thinking about your geometry, think about it like it is an Amazon box. And this Amazon box contains a gift that you want to give someone. So your geometry is the Amazon box. It's the shape. Now, the material that you will wrap that geometry with is gift wrap, right? So like think about it. You buy gift wrap and you wrap that box and now your box looks pretty, right? So you take the geometry and you wrap it with the material. The texture is the pattern printed on that gift wrap. So whether it's balloons because it's a birthday, or whether it is like Christmas stuff because it's Christmas, or whether it's hearts because it's Valentine, whatever pattern is printed on the gift wrap, that's your texture. And it works exactly the same way. It is a single image that just repeats as many times as needed to cover that surface. And that image is what you see in this preview here. This preview is the image itself that is repeating. And if you want to better see that image, what you can do is in your texture properties, you can click on this button here that is going to allow you to edit the texture. What I really care about is the fact that you can now see it as a separate image. I wouldn't necessarily edit my images here. That's just a word of warning. There are better places to edit images, but you can see the single image. So I'm going to close this window and now let's take a look at what are the properties of our textures. So first of all, it is an image. So it's basically an image file. You need to make sure that this guy is checked on. Otherwise, it's going to basically undo that texture. It's going to like remove it from the application and we're going to see what happens in a second. Now, the most important properties when working with textures in SketchUp is going to be the dimensions and the proportions. So one thing that I really, really like about SketchUp is the fact that your textures are scaled to the real world. In some programs, you work with order of magnitude. So like you basically say how many times you want the image to repeat, which is insane. Like my brain melts every time that I have to use one of those. In SketchUp, what you are saying is one square of this image is going to be 10 feet by 4 feet. And if I want it to be smaller, I can come here and say 5 feet. And you can see that the image got smaller. Now, you may also have noticed that the other dimension also got smaller, despite the fact that I didn't click on it. And that is because by default, your dimensions are locked together. Your texture has a locked aspect ratio. If you want to change that, what you can do is click here, and that is going to unlock that aspect ratio. So for example, I think this image is supposed to be more like a square. Like again, in the preview, you can see that it's pretty squarish. So I want it to be 5 by 5, and then I want to go back to locking it. This image corresponds to the, let's refer to it as the horizontal. It's usually referred as to the U. And then this guy corresponds to the high or the V. So now it's 5 by 5. And if I come here and I make it 10 feet again, see, now it is a little bit more proportional. So that 10 by 10 basically means that if I would measure here and I would measure like 10 feet, enter, and then I measure, let's say like 10 feet here, like this is the size of one of these blocks of like image. And then like the image just repeats like as many times as it needs to. Okay, so that is the first thing that you can control. The second thing that you can control about the material, about textures, is actually the color. Now, just because I'm working with a texture does not mean that these settings go into the garbage. you can still work with them. So let's say that I want this wood floor to be a little bit lighter. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to move my slider and oh, Jesus Christ, that looks horrendous. So you want to be careful with this. If you just go straight to playing with the sliders, the texture is going to look very radioactive very fast. So first thing first, let's fix this. I'm just going to go back to my reset color. And secondly, before you start messing up with these sliders, what you want to do is click here, colorize. So this is basically going to force these settings to apply to the texture as a whole. Because if you have these checked off, basically what happens is that each pixel that is a different color is going to behave slightly different. And that's why it ends up looking radioactive. So now if I come here and I make it lighter, you can see it's still not great. I'm not going to lie to you, but it's not as bad. Let's say I bring saturation down a bit and it is a little bit more palatable. Again, if you change your mind, you can always go back to reset color. And now you can use reset color either here or here. It's the same thing. But now it is finally time for me to address the elephant in the room. And that is that this material is disgusting. I'm so sorry if there's anyone who worked with the original Sketchup team, who worked on these libraries, and they see me and they hear me. I'm very sorry. I'm pretty sure that you had the best intentions, but especially in the context of interior design, these materials are so ugly. They are terrible. They are the worst. You don't want to use them. In fact, whenever I am evaluating the portfolios of other fellow designers, if they have 3D models and I see a single SketchUp material in their 3D models, I am like immediately next, pass, denied. Like these materials are so ugly. And it's not just the fact that they're ugly, it's the fact that keep in mind, as an interior designer, a key part of your proposal is the material itself. So you cannot tell the client, yes, it's going to be a wooden floor. Don't worry about it. We will figure it out later. No, you have to show that wooden floor. That floor, is it an oak? Is it a pine? Is it a teak? Is it stained? Is it natural? Like, is it a white plank? Is it a narrow plank? Is it parquet? You have to show all of those details in your texture. But the thing is that these SketchUp textures don't really give us that many options. So what do we do? Well, that is where we go searching online. So I'm going to spend an entire video talking about that a little bit later. But basically what I want to tell you now is the fact that any file that is a JPEG or PNG can be used as a texture. And when I say any file that is a JPEG or a PNG, I do mean any file that is a JPEG or a PNG. So if I come here and I say, nope, that's a web page. Maybe, oh, this guy here will give us better luck. That's an ABF. Come on. Don't. Yes. Oh, he's blinking. This is perfect. Please let it be. No, you know what? Snap. We're going to take a snap. Snap. I will not be denied. Here we go. We're going to save my desktop. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace my material. So if you want to replace a texture, all you have to do is click on this folder here, and you're going to find your material in your browser, capture, and there we go. Isn't he lovely? The man, the legend, the myth, Mr. Nicolas Cage. Now, I really hope that you never have an interior design project where you need to like wrap up an entire room in Nicolas Cage. But if you do, please let me know. I want to see the results. So I know, jokes aside, the idea here is that any image can be used as a texture for a material. And this opens a whole world of possibilities because it basically means that, for example, if there is, let's say, a unique feature of a space, you can literally go to that space, take a picture with your camera, edit that image in Photoshop to make it look a little bit cleaner, a little bit nicer, and then use that image as a texture in your model. So there is no reason to not be extremely custom and extremely specific with this because SketchUp gives you the possibility. So to finish up with this introduction to materials, I just want to talk about creating materials. Creating materials is pretty easy, pretty straightforward, especially when you understand what you get with the editing material properties. So basically, whenever you create a material, the preview is going to be whatever material you were working with before. In other words, whenever you create a material in SketchUp, you're basically duplicating your current material. If you don't want the properties of your previous material to be set up on your new material, what you can do is before you create your new material, switch to the default and then go to create. And that's going to give you basically a white canvas. But otherwise, you can go give your material a name, Mr. Cage. You can come here and say that I want to use a texture, for example. That's going to allow me to load that image. And then I can decide, for example, the size. I want it to be 5 feet. I want him to be larger than life. And I can go okay and apply. Oh, that's kind of small. Let me make him bigger. No, bigger. Beautiful. Fantastic. All right. With that, we have reached the end of this video. I hope you found it helpful. If you have any questions, by all means, feel free to leave them in the comments. If you liked, maybe you should consider subscribing to my channel. But otherwise, thank you very much for joining in. Thank you very much for sticking through, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.